Hey guys, tonight we slip back thousands of years into the dust-caked streets of Mesopotamia, where the temples rise higher than anything else on the horizon. The air smells of incense, livestock, and the faint metallic tang of bronze weapons clinking at soldiers' hips. In this world, you don't exactly choose your destiny, it gets chosen for you. And sometimes, that destiny is wrapped up in the temple walls, where sacred work looks suspiciously like the kind of job description nobody really volunteers for. You probably won't survive this gig. But don't worry, you don't have to apply. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and the time you're listening. I love seeing where in the world everyone's tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand barefoot on the hot clay bricks, your feet already toughened from years of work. Around you, the city of Uruk hums with life, merchants shouting over grain prices, donkeys braying, and the deep, throaty chanting from inside the temple of Ishtar. The temple itself gleams with imported cedar wood and glazed tiles, a rare sparkle in a landscape of mud brick monotony. Everyone tells you it's an honor to be chosen as one of the goddess's women. But the truth is, it's not really a choice at all. One morning, a priest points to you. Maybe it's because your family owes a debt. Maybe it's because someone in power thinks you have the right look. Historians still argue whether every temple prostitute was born into this role or pressed into it later, but either way, your personal vote doesn't count. You're informed, not asked. And once you step inside the ziggurat, that enormous tiered mountain of baked brick, the outside world shrinks behind you. By day, you prepare offerings, bowls of dates, honey, and beer set before the goddess's statue. By night, your body becomes the offering. The idea, people say, is that when a man lies with you, he's really lying with the goddess, channeling divine fertility into the city. Sounds mystical in theory. In practice, you're basically the human middle manager for cosmic paperwork nobody asked you to file. The irony is rich. The same men who bow reverently before the goddess also feel free to sneer at you in the marketplace. To them, you're both sacred vessel and public shame. It's like being on the cover of a holy magazine while people still whisper behind their hands that your dress is too revealing. And don't forget, temple life isn't cushioned by luxury. You sleep on reed mats, not silk, and eat what's left after offerings are sorted. If the harvest is good, you might get dates sticky enough to glue your teeth together. If not, it's barley mush again. At least barley beer keeps you a little hazy about how unfair the deal is. Now, there's a quirky tidbit most people don't realize. Some rituals involved simulated marriages between the high priestess and the king, meant to guarantee the land's fertility. In some cities, this may have included, well, you can imagine the theatrics. Historians still argue whether this sacred marriage was symbolic or literal. But either way, it set the tone for your reality. Bodies offered to gods, kings and strangers all blurred together in one never-ending ceremony. So here you are, wearing strings of beads that dig into your skin, hair perfumed with oils strong enough to attract bees, and trying to look divine even when you're bone-tired. The temple drums throb through the walls, each beat reminding you, you don't belong to yourself anymore. The temple might be the tallest building around, but inside, the ceiling feels low, pressing down with duty. You look at the goddess statue, lapis eyes staring forever forward, and wonder if she ever blinks. You wonder if she ever listens. The temple from the outside is all shimmering surfaces, glazed bricks in blues and golds that catch the Mesopotamian sun, banners fluttering in the dry wind, and incense smoke curling lazily into the sky. People traveling from villages miles away look up at it and think, wow, that must be paradise inside. You, standing at the gates, know better. Paradise doesn't usually come with this much sweat and this little freedom. Every morning begins before dawn. You wake up on a reed mat that leaves patterned marks across your skin, the scent of yesterday's burned frankincense still clinging in the air. The temple's stone corridors echo with sandals slapping against floors, and priests already shuffle around, muttering incantations to greet the sun. You join the ranks of women preparing the inner chambers, sweeping dust that somehow keeps coming back. Seriously, who knew dust could be this ambitious? By the time worshippers arrive, you're already tired. The temple is supposed to be a place of sacred luxury, but most of that luxury is meant for the gods. The best food, the sweetest beer, the shiniest jewelry, they're all placed before statues. You get what's left, and usually that means dried bread that could double as construction material. Still, the image matters. To visitors, you're draped in silks, hair perfumed with oil, eyes rimmed with crushed mineral powders that sting if you sweat too hard. You smile, even though your jaw aches from holding it. Now, here's a quirky little tidbit. The temple floors were sometimes sprinkled with fragrant water to cool the gods. Imagine, mopping floors not just for cleanliness, but so divine statues don't get overheated in the Mesopotamian sun. You're half janitor, half handmaiden, and half sacrificial symbol, which is at least one half too many for comfort. By midday, the air inside becomes stifling. Fires burn continuously in braziers, and combined with the summer heat, it's like working inside a bread oven. Sweat runs down your back under those fancy robes, and yet you're supposed to look serene, as if the goddess herself is keeping you perfectly cool. You'd give anything for one of those modern electric fans I told you to turn on earlier. People come in waves. Some arrive in awe, placing figs, honeycombs, or even livestock at the altar. Others show up drunk from morning beer and leer at you while pretending to pray. You can't roll your eyes. A priest is always watching. The contradiction burns. You're simultaneously a holy vessel and someone's idea of temple entertainment. Historians still argue whether every temple prostitute truly participated in religious rituals with visitors or if many roles were symbolic. But the whispers in your city leave little doubt. Your body is part of the transaction. You catch yourself wondering sometimes if the goddess appreciates all this effort. Does she really need 12 bowls of dates and 3 women in silk to feel worshipped? Or is this entire system just a very elaborate way for priests to control people? That thought alone is dangerous, but it slips in anyway, like a shadow in your mind. Evening doesn't mean rest. Torches are lit, drums beat louder, and chants roll into the night. Your tasks shift into ritual mode, standing near altars, presenting yourself as an embodiment of divine beauty, sometimes performing dances or recitations you practiced for weeks. Every move has to be precise. Step wrong, drop a bead, stumble over a line, and you risk angering not just the priests, but supposedly the gods themselves. No pressure, right? Some women thrive in this structure, proud to be part of divine ceremonies. Others, like you, feel the strain more each day. And remember, the city outside is watching. People believe that your performance inside these walls directly affects their harvest, their fertility, their prosperity. If the barley fails this year, guess who gets whispered about? Yeah, you, sweating under layers of silk. As the night deepens, you're released back to your sleeping quarters. The silks come off, revealing skin sticky with incense smoke and sweat. Your stomach growls. Maybe someone left a half-rotten fig behind in the offering pile. You'd eat it anyway. Luxury on the outside, exhaustion within. That's the real temple life. Polished walls hiding endless labor. Smiling faces hiding weary souls. You wake up sore, your muscles tight from sleeping on mats thinner than a stretched-out pancake. But today isn't much different from yesterday, or tomorrow. The rhythm of temple life is repetitive, and at its core lies one unsettling truth. Your body is not really your own. From the moment the priest pointed at you in the marketplace, you've belonged to the temple, which means you've belonged to everyone but yourself. The priests say it so gently. You are the goddess's sacred vessel, a bridge between humans and the divine. They dress it up in poetry, like calling a mop the conduit of cleanliness. The reality: priests and rulers decide when you serve, who you serve, and how. It's a job description with no weekends off, no "sorry, I'm busy" excuses, and definitely no retirement plan. During rituals, the symbolism is heavy. When men enter the temple seeking blessings, they aren't supposed to be with you. They're supposed to be with the goddess. You're simply the medium, like clay tablets carrying words you didn't write. Historians still argue whether this ritualized intimacy happened with all temple women or only a select group. But one fact is clear. Women's choices were limited, controlled, and judged through a lens of religious authority. That might sound lofty, but picture the human side. You, sitting quietly while a priest informs you that tonight you'll be participating in divine fertility. There's no way to say no. If you protest, it's not rebellion, it's blasphemy. And blasphemy is a quick way to end up cursed, exiled, or worse. The gods don't take rejection lightly, or at least the priests don't. You glance at the other women. Some seem resigned, moving like clockwork through their duties. Others look hollow, eyes glazed, as if they're already halfway elsewhere in their minds. And then there are the rare few who act proud, who carry themselves as if the goddess really flows through them. You wonder whether that's genuine belief or just survival instinct dressed up in confidence. There's an odd, fringe tidbit recorded in certain Mesopotamian myths. Some priestesses were thought to carry oracles in their bodies, channeling divine messages during rituals. Imagine that. On top of being a living offering, you're suddenly expected to spit out cosmic wisdom too. Talk about multitasking. The rulers reinforce it all. Kings often tie their legitimacy to the goddess Ishtar or Inanna. Claiming victory in war or abundance in crops comes from her favor. And where does that divine favor get funneled? Right through you and your sisters in the temple. So when a king prays for fertile land, you're part of the contract. Your body, his power, the goddess's supposed blessing. It's a triangle you didn't ask to stand in. Day after day, this reality weighs heavier. The temple walls feel closer. You remember running barefoot as a child in open fields, dust flying behind your heels, and now you barely step outside except under watchful eyes. Even the clothes remind you the silks and beads aren't yours to keep. They're costumes loaned to you for a performance you didn't audition for. And here's the kicker. You can't even fully claim the sacredness they talk about. People bow before the goddess, not you. You're both indispensable and invisible. You're like the stage crew in a Broadway show. Without you, the performance collapses, but nobody claps for the crew. Sometimes, in the still moments between rituals, you press your palms together and whisper quietly to the goddess statue. Not the official chants, not the scripted lines, but your own plea. Do you see me? Or am I just another moving part in a machine built to keep the city running? The statue doesn't answer. Her lapis eyes just shine back, cool and eternal. The next morning, the temple gates creak open, and in shuffles a long line of worshippers clutching offerings. Some carry baskets of figs, glistening and sweet, while others lug jars of beer, sloshing against their sides. A few wealthier patrons bring coins stamped with images of kings. And then there are the unlucky ones who clearly couldn't spare much, a single onion, a chunk of bread gone stiff, or, yes, a handful of half-rotten fruit that smells more like a compost heap than a divine gift. This is where your role becomes awkward. When offerings are generous, you smile and bless them, thanking the goddess on their behalf. But when a patron offers something less impressive, you have to pretend it's just as sacred. You bow, murmur a prayer, and try not to wrinkle your nose. People are watching, and one wrong twitch could brand you ungrateful, or worse, disrespectful to the goddess herself. It's a performance layered on top of your already demanding duties. Sometimes the patrons themselves are harder to manage than the gifts. One man might bring a gold ring and treat you like a holy vessel, whispering prayers with trembling reverence. The next will slam down a bruised fig and snicker under his breath, daring you to flinch. The temple is a sacred space, but it doubles as a marketplace of egos, where generosity buys status and stinginess buys gossip. Historians still argue whether these offerings were meant more for the gods or for the priests to redistribute. But you know firsthand, some of those figs end up in your dinner bowl, fresh or not. Quirky tidbit time. Some records suggest priests actually recycled bad offerings by tossing them back into the pile later, passing them off as new. Imagine being blessed with the same sad onion twice. That's divine recycling at its finest. The tension builds whenever someone feels their offering wasn't properly acknowledged. If a priest nods curtly instead of smiling, rumors spread that the gods are displeased. And if a worshipper leaves feeling insulted, they might complain in the marketplace that the goddess, or worse, you, showed them disrespect. In a world where famine or flood lurks around every corner, people are desperate to assign blame. Guess who's the easiest target? The women inside the temple. As the line continues, your stomach clenches, not just from hunger, but from dread. You never know whether the next bowl will hold honey dripping like golden sunlight or something crawling with flies. Both require the same serene smile. You start to feel like your face is made of clay, cracked at the edges but painted over to hide the flaws. It isn't just the physical offerings, it's the constant uncertainty of how you'll be treated. Revered one moment, mocked the next, depending entirely on someone else's mood and wealth. One slip of the tongue, one visible grimace, and your reputation can crumble faster than a mud brick wall in the rain. And yet, as night falls and the last worshipper departs, you're the one sweeping the temple floor, clearing away the scraps and spilled beer. The goddess's statue shines with offerings piled high, but you're left with sore arms and a back that feels twice your age. The contradiction digs into you. You're supposed to embody divine grace, yet you're constantly balancing figs in one hand and your dignity in the other. And in Mesopotamia, dignity doesn't last long if it depends on someone else's generosity. By now, you've learned the rhythm of offerings and rituals, but there's another rhythm you can't escape, the quiet dread of illness. Every day inside the temple, you gamble with your health because disease lurks in every corner and no one really understands how it works. You share reed mats, food bowls, and air thick with incense smoke. A cough spreads like wildfire and fevers flare without warning. The real terror, though, comes from your work. Being a temple prostitute means constant risk of infections you have no names for. Some women develop sores, others chronic fevers, and still others just waste away slowly, their skin pale under the glow of oil lamps. There are no doctors in the way you'd think of them today. Instead, priests double as healers, and their toolkits look more like kitchen cupboards than pharmacies. Here's a mainstream fact. Mesopotamians believed illness was punishment from the gods or curses from angry spirits. Healing involved appeasing those unseen forces as much as treating the body. So when you start feeling the telltale burn of infection, you don't get ointment. You get a priest mumbling incantations while smearing your skin with crushed herbs and goat fat. Not exactly reassuring. Sometimes remedies cross the line from odd to absurd. Quirky tidbit: there's a surviving tablet that prescribes a salve mixed with river mud and, you guessed it, crocodile dung. Yes, someone thought crocodile poop was medicinal. Remember when I joked about sunscreen made of dung? Well, Mesopotamian healthcare didn't always improve from there, and yet even the strange treatments are preferable to the alternative, being branded unclean. If priests decide your illness is a curse, you risk being quarantined or even expelled from the temple, cut off from food, shelter, and what little protection you still cling to. You'd think catching a fever would earn sympathy, but in a world where divine favor keeps crops alive, a sick body is a dangerous omen. Historians still argue whether temple women received special medical attention compared to the general public or were left more vulnerable, but either way, you know the stakes. One night of shivering under your mat, and suddenly your life could spiral into exile or worse. The cruelest part is how preventable some of it feels with hindsight. You can sense that washing hands, separating food from waste, or just letting yourself rest would help, but none of that is part of temple protocol. Instead, you're expected to keep smiling, to keep appearing divine, even as your body betrays you. So you rub the salves, whisper the prayers, and hope the fever breaks. And if it doesn't, you try not to think too much about the women who simply disappeared after too many nights of sickness. Maybe the goddess welcomed them. Maybe the priests just carried them out quietly before sunrise. Your life inside these walls is already borrowed time. Illness just shortens the lease. The strange thing is how people can hold two completely opposite ideas about you at the same time. Step outside the temple in your ceremonial beads, and villagers bow their heads as if you're dripping in divine stardust. Step one block further, and the same villagers whisper insults behind your back, muttering words that sound a lot like shame. You're sacred, but you're also tainted. You're holy, but you're also scandalous. Welcome to the paradox of temple life. The priests insist you embody the goddess's beauty and fertility, a living symbol of cosmic power. But the gossip in the market paints you as little better than a street worker. It's as if people can't decide whether to honor you or condemn you, so they just do both, depending on the mood and the company. One mainstream fact: Mesopotamian law codes, like Hammurabi's, made sharp distinctions between respectable women and prostitutes. Respectable women wore veils. Prostitutes were forbidden to. Imagine that. You're considered a sacred servant of the goddess, yet legally you can't even cover your hair in public without risking punishment. The double standard scratches at you like sand in your sandals. And here's a quirky little tidbit. Some surviving inscriptions show temple women were occasionally paraded in public festivals, shown off as symbols of divine favor. You might ride in a decorated cart, your body dusted with shimmering powders, while crowds cheered. But once the parade was over, you went back to being the subject of hushed insults. It's like being a celebrity who can't leave their house without paparazzi. Except the paparazzi are neighbors who both envy and despise you. Historians still argue whether these women felt pride in their sacred status or were crushed under the weight of public stigma. The truth was probably both, depending on the day and the woman. You might feel honored in the morning when people bring offerings, then humiliated in the afternoon when the butcher refuses to meet your eyes. The paradox seeps into every part of your identity. You can't marry, at least not in the conventional sense, because you already belong to the goddess. That means you won't have the household respect other women gain by becoming wives and mothers. Yet you're constantly blamed for being too available, as if you chose this path for yourself. Spoiler alert, you didn't. At night, lying on your reed mat, you replay the contradictions in your head. People bow, then gossip. Priests bless you, then control you. You're elevated, then debased, sometimes in the span of a single ritual. It's dizzying, like standing on a rope bridge that sways no matter how carefully you balance. And through it all, the goddess's statue watches silently, lapis eyes unblinking. Maybe she understands. Or maybe, like everyone else, she just demands without ever giving back. The temple walls might shelter you, but they don't shield you from the constant buzz of gossip in the marketplace. Every trip outside, whether to fetch grain, accompany a priest, or simply pass through the city streets, reminds you how much people love to talk. And you, unfortunately, are everyone's favorite subject. The baker's wife whispers that you've bewitched her husband. The potter's apprentice snickers that you'll end up cursed for sharing too much with strangers. A group of children trail behind you, chanting songs that twist your sacred title into something filthy. It's like living in a small town where everyone knows your business. Except your business has been exaggerated tenfold. Here's the mainstream fact. In Mesopotamian cities, gossip wasn't just idle chatter, it was social control. Without newspapers or police reports, word of mouth shaped reputations, and reputations could determine whether you survived. If enough people believed you were cursed, even the priests might distance themselves. That's the kind of PR problem you don't come back from. A quirky tidbit slips into the mix here. Some clay tablets preserve complaints that read a lot like ancient gossip columns. One tablet has a line about a woman being seen drinking beer with too many men. Imagine your life reduced to a sentence etched in clay for eternity. Your reputation literally baked into stone. Historians still argue whether temple prostitutes were genuinely ostracized or if their notoriety gave them a strange sort of influence. After all, people may sneer, but they also believe you have the goddess's ear. Sometimes villagers slip you questions in hushed tones. Will my wife bear a child this year? Will the harvest be good? They despise you in public, yet privately crave your blessing. The contradictions sting. One moment you're accused of spreading disease, the next you're being begged to intercede with the goddess for someone's sick child. It feels like standing in a storm, praised, mocked, revered, and feared all at once. As you walk back to the temple, gossip buzzing like flies around your ears, you keep your eyes down. Your bare feet slap against hot clay streets. Every word you overhear weighs heavier than the last, until you're almost relieved to step back inside those suffocating temple walls. At least there, the whispers are muffled by stone. But deep down, you know tomorrow's market trip will bring the same songs, the same smirks, and the same endless churn of rumor. And there's no way to silence it. In Mesopotamia, gossip is a currency, and you're one of the most valuable coins. Inside the temple, the air might hum with incense, but beneath the chanting, another rhythm beats: politics. You start to realize that much of your life isn't shaped by gods at all, but by priests playing very human games. The high priest sits at the center of it all, robed in linen, voice heavy with authority. He claims every word he utters comes straight from the goddess. Conveniently, those words almost always serve his interests. More land for the temple, more taxes for the priests, more obedience from the people. And you? You're one of his pawns, moved across the ritual board to make the illusion of divine will more convincing. Here's a mainstream fact. Mesopotamian temples weren't just religious centers. They were banks, granaries, and political hubs. The priests controlled wealth and resources and, by extension, controlled kings. Your temple, glittering with offerings, is essentially the city's vault. That makes your body not just sacred, it's part of the temple's portfolio. The rituals you perform are never just rituals. When you bless a soldier before battle, it's really the priests sending him off with propaganda wrapped in divine perfume. When you smile at a foreign envoy during a ceremony, it's not flirtation, it's diplomacy. Your presence reinforces the idea that the goddess herself approves of whatever political scheme is unfolding. And then there are the rivalries. Quirky tidbit. Some records hint at temple feuds where different priesthoods try to outdo each other with increasingly extravagant rituals. Think competitive religious theater. You can almost hear the high priests whispering, "Oh, they sacrificed 2 oxen last festival. Fine, we'll sacrifice 4. And of course, more theatrics mean more work for you and your sisters." Historians still argue whether temple women had any real influence in these political games or whether they were simply stage props. Maybe some priestesses leveraged their closeness to powerful men into subtle sway. But for most of you, the reality is clear. You're trapped in a play where the script is written by priests, and you're not allowed to improvise. You watch as the high priest accepts sacks of grain, tallying wealth in the temple's storerooms while preaching about divine generosity. You notice how the offerings meant for the goddess often end up funding construction projects or paying mercenaries. And when the king himself arrives, bowing solemnly before the statue, you catch the glance he exchanges with the priest, a quiet acknowledgement that this whole display is about keeping the city in line. It's sobering, isn't it? You're wrapped in silk, painted in coal, glowing in torchlight, but really you're part of a carefully crafted illusion. Every smile you give, every gesture you make, bolsters the authority of men who control both politics and faith. The goddess may be eternal, but the priests are the ones cashing in. The city outside the temple walls thrives on grain, goats, and gossip, but prosperity never lasts forever. When the rains falter or the rivers flood wrong, famine slithers into Mesopotamia like an uninvited guest who plans to stay too long. And when famine strikes, your place in the temple becomes even more precarious. At first, the signs are subtle. Fewer baskets of figs brought as offerings, less honey dripping golden across the altar. Then suddenly, the granaries echo hollow when you walk past. The priests mutter to each other, brows furrowed, and the king stages longer, louder rituals begging the gods for mercy. You can practically hear the desperation in his voice, because if the crops fail, people won't just starve. They'll start looking for someone to blame. Mainstream. Fact. Mesopotamian city-states were deeply dependent on the annual flooding of the Tigris and Euphrates. When those rivers behaved, life was good. When they didn't, famine could wipe out entire harvests. And guess what? Hungry people are rarely reasonable. For you and the other temple women, the consequences show up fast. Worshippers no longer arrive with generous baskets of dates. Instead, they trickle in with pitiful scraps, or nothing at all. Priests, nervous about dwindling supplies, make sure they're fed first. And you're at the bottom of the ladder. The sacred vessels of the goddess are suddenly scraping. Burnt barley from the bottoms of cooking pots. There's a quirky tidbit in some old inscriptions about priests, blaming famine on the goddess's anger. The solution? More rituals, more sacrifices. Which, of course, means more duties for you. Starving and exhausted, you're still expected to stand at the altar, smile, and embody divine abundance while your stomach growls loud enough to join the chorus. Historians still argue whether temple prostitutes fared better or worse than the average townsfolk during famines. On one hand, the temple was a storehouse, which might mean more access to food. On the other hand, the temple was also a convenient scapegoat. If the city starved, priests could claim the goddess was displeased, and since you were her representative, the blame slid right onto your shoulders. Outside, tension thickens. Neighbors eye each other's goats suspiciously. Children cry at night from hunger, and fights break out over scraps of bread. Inside, you can't help but wonder how long before someone decides your presence isn't a blessing, but a curse. After all, if you're supposed to channel the goddess's fertility and the land is still barren, what good are you? So you kneel before the altar, whispering prayers you're not sure anyone hears, trying to keep your hands steady even as they tremble from weakness. And when you walk back to your reed mat, you clutch your hollow belly and realize famine doesn't just empty the granaries, it empties you too. The famine may pass, but sickness never really leaves. In Mesopotamia, every ache, rash, or fever is blamed on spirits or curses. And you, trapped in temple service, become very familiar with both the cures and the curses. When you fall ill, you don't get a quiet rest. Instead, you're surrounded by chanting priests who wave burning herbs under your nose and mutter incantations that sound more like riddles than remedies. The temple air thickens with smoke until your eyes water and someone presses a paste of crushed dates, mud, and who knows what onto your skin. That's supposed to draw out the sickness. Spoiler, it mostly just attracts flies. Here's your mainstream fact. Mesopotamian medicine was a strange blend of practical herbal knowledge and spiritual ritual. People knew certain plants helped with pain or fevers, but they also believed the illness came from demons or the wrath of a god. So every treatment combined real ingredients with mystical words. Half pharmacy, half magic show, quirky tidbit. Some cuneiform tablets prescribe remedies that sound almost comedic. For instance, one treatment for toothache involved reciting a spell about worms eating the teeth, then spitting beer into the patient's mouth as if drowning the worms. You can imagine the sticky mess that left behind. The worst part is when your sickness is considered not just physical, but moral. Priests might declare you've been cursed by someone jealous of your role, or that your impurity has drawn divine punishment. And guess who has to fix it? You do, through long, exhausting purification rituals. Maybe that means standing under cold water while priests chant, or being forced to swallow bitter brews meant to flush the demons out. You already feel terrible, and now you're gagging on a potion that tastes like rotten onions soaked in vinegar. Historians still argue whether these rituals were sincere attempts at healing or just ways to reinforce priestly power. Either way, you're the one caught in the middle, half patient, half prop for religious theatre. At night, you lie awake, hoping the fever breaks, hoping the cough eases, hoping the goddess decides you've suffered enough. You wonder if the spirits are real or if sickness is simply the cost of crowded lives, dirty water, and endless duties. But you can't ask that out loud. Questioning the official story is as dangerous as the illness itself. And so you endure. Mud pastes, chants, smoke, bitter brews, because in this world, cure is a relative term. Sometimes you recover, sometimes you don't, and sometimes the only thing holding you together is sheer stubbornness. Because the temple demands you keep smiling, even with a demon worm supposedly gnawing on your teeth. Just when you think temple life has already wrung you dry, the city's walls tremble with a new kind of dread. Foreign invaders. Rumors ripple through the market long before soldiers appear. Traders whisper of marching armies, strange banners, and kings with names you've never heard, all claiming the gods gave them the right to rule. And when those invaders arrive, they don't care much about your temple's rules or your goddess's authority. The city's gates shudder, people scatter, and soon the marketplace where you once dodged gossip is filled with foreign soldiers, stomping over clay streets. The temple, towering and proud, becomes both a beacon and a target. The conquerors head straight for it, because in Mesopotamia, capturing a temple is as good as capturing a crown. Mainstream fact, invading armies in the ancient Near East often looted temples, stripping them of gold, livestock, and sacred objects. For the conquerors, it wasn't just about wealth, it was about breaking a city's spirit by showing that even its gods could be humbled. And you? You're not a statue that can be carried away, but you might as well be another piece of plunder. Soldiers pour into the temple, their armor clattering, eyes sweeping over the offerings. And over you and the other women. Sacred, maybe. Safe? Definitely not. The priests bark orders, trying to keep order, but their voices sound thin against the clash of foreign swords. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some chronicles mention victors parading captured temple women as trophies in festivals. Proof they'd conquered not just land, but divine power itself. Imagine being marched in front of jeering crowds, draped not in sacred beads, but in chains. Historians still argue whether invaders always abused temple women or sometimes spared them for political reasons. Perhaps, in rare cases, conquerors respected the goddess enough to leave her servants untouched. But from where you stand, pressed against the temple wall as armored men argue over loot, it's hard to believe in mercy. That night, the temple is no longer the safe, if suffocating, place you've always known. The incense smoke is replaced by the reek of sweat and spilled beer, the chants drowned by foreign voices. You curl on your mat, clutching the beads still strung around your neck, wondering if the goddess watches or if even she has turned her face away. War has a way of stripping illusions. The priests' power games crumble, the city's gossip fades, and all that's left is survival. And for you, survival suddenly feels even less certain than before. The invaders may eventually march on, but the city doesn't forget. Life continues, though scarred, and the temple resumes its rhythms. Yet even in calmer times, you notice another divide forming in the world around you, the sharp line separating you, the sacred woman of the goddess, from those who work in the brothels down by the docks. At first glance, outsiders might think the difference is small. After all, both you and the street women are tied to the exchange of intimacy for survival. But inside the city, the contrast is glaring. You wear beads and silk, stand in torchlight, and chant hymns. They huddle in alleyways, bargain over coins, and face open scorn. The irony? You're often scorned too, just wrapped in fancier packaging. Here's the mainstream fact. Mesopotamian law codes made distinctions between different classes of prostitutes. Temple women were technically dedicated to the gods, while brothel workers served the city's appetite directly. One could claim sacredness, the other couldn't. But in both cases, men wielded the power. A quirky tidbit surfaces in some records. Brothels were often located near taverns, making them lively social hubs where men drank beer, played dice, and struck deals. Some archaeologists even argued taverns doubled as informal meeting houses. Imagine being blamed for corrupting society when half the city's business deals probably happened under the tavern roof. Historians still argue whether temple women looked down on brothel workers or felt solidarity with them. The divide may have been more about status than reality. You share the same risks, disease, violence, judgment, but at least inside temple walls, you're dressed in silk instead of plain linen. That difference can feel enormous when people are watching, yet paper-thin when you're lying awake at night. Walking past the docks, you sometimes catch the eyes of those women. They glance at you, beads glinting in the sun, and you sense the unspoken thought. Which one of us is truly better off? You can't answer. Maybe neither of you is. Back inside the temple, you resume your duties, repeating the chants, performing the rituals. But the question lingers like smoke. Sacred or not, do the beads around your neck really change the weight of your life? As years pass in the temple, another shadow looms larger than famine or foreign soldiers. Disease. Not the everyday fevers and coughs, but epidemics that sweep through the city like dust storms, sparing few and terrifying all. It begins with whispers. A family down the street struck with sudden weakness, neighbors burning strange-smelling herbs outside their doors. Soon, the markets thin, the streets empty, and the priests tighten the temple gates. But sickness doesn't respect gates. It creeps in with the merchants, with the servants, with the offerings themselves. And when it does, your reed mat becomes less a place to rest and more a front-row seat to misery. Mainstream fact. The earliest known written medical texts in Mesopotamia describe outbreaks that resemble plagues, with whole communities collapsing under waves of illness. With no concept of germs, people blamed spirits, curses, or divine anger. The quirky tidbit. Some incantations for warding off disease included clay figurines of demons, which were buried under thresholds or tossed into rivers. Imagine trying to feel safe while knowing your health supposedly depends on a tiny clay goblin buried in the dirt. When disease hits the temple, your sacred role doesn't excuse you. Priests might call on you to participate in extra rituals, singing chants while your throat scratches with its own cough. If you get sick, you're not seen as unlucky. You're seen as polluted. Your body is supposed to embody the goddess. But now, it's just another reminder that even divine servants bleed, sweat, and die. Historians still argue whether temple communities were safer during epidemics because of stored food and better shelter, or whether their crowded conditions made outbreaks worse. Either way, when you lie sweating on your mat, clutching your chest against a rattling cough, the debate feels more like trivia than comfort. The city outside groans in silence. Funeral processions pass more often than market sellers. Priests chant longer, their voices hoarse, promising the goddess will relent. You half believe them, half don't. All you know is that plague turns everyone, kings, priests, prostitutes, into the same fragile creature, clinging to life with nothing but prayers and stubborn breath. And in the haze of fever, you wonder whether the goddess herself coughs, whether divinity ever falters, or whether this suffering is simply your burden for serving her. even if you survive plague and famine. There's another storm always circling overhead: the gaze of the city itself. Respectable wives and mothers pass you in the marketplace with tight lips and narrowed eyes. Their children tug at their sleeves and whisper, "Is that her?" And while they may call you sacred, their tone often twists that word into something closer to dangerous. The truth is, your very presence unsettles them. You embody a power that doesn't fit neatly into the city's order. Wives are expected to be modest, veiled, loyal to their husbands. You, however, walk unveiled within the temple, decked in beads and bright robes, part of rituals that outsiders only half understand. To some, you're glamorous. To others, you're scandalous. To many, you're simply suspect. Mainstream fact: in Mesopotamian law, respectable women were required to veil in public, while prostitutes and slaves were forbidden from doing so. That veil was more than cloth. It was a boundary marker, declaring who was honorable and who wasn't, and temple women often sat uncomfortably in between. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some records suggest women caught veiling when they weren't entitled to could have tar poured on their heads as punishment. Imagine being in charge of sacred rituals but risking sticky humiliation if you wore the wrong accessory outside. Historians still argue whether temple women were envied or resented more. Did people see you as a vessel of divine power or just another woman taking liberties? Ordinary wives weren't allowed. The evidence points both ways, and maybe it was always both. Meanwhile, you feel the weight of their stares everywhere. At the well, women draw back when you step forward. In the market, sellers push their baskets closer to respectable customers first. And in whispers behind reed walls, people speculate about whether your goddess's favor is real or whether you're just another pawn of the priests. Back in the temple, the priests remind you constantly of your higher role. But that doesn't quiet the sting of being seen as lower by your neighbors. It's a strange place to live, balanced on a line where neither side fully accepts you. Sacred and scorned, honored and hated, you become a walking contradiction. And no matter how brightly your beads glimmer, you can't polish away the judgment in their eyes. If your body bears the marks of temple life, so too does your spirit. The years chip away not only at your strength, but also at your sense of who you are. When you first entered the temple, people told you that you belonged to the goddess, that you were special, chosen, exalted. And for a while, maybe you believed them. But over time, you notice how thin that story wears. You're not free to choose whom to love, where to go, or even how to dress. Every action is dictated: what you eat, when you sing, how you sit, how you smile. You begin to wonder, where exactly do you fit in this sacred arrangement? Are you a woman, or just a tool polished to reflect someone else's power? Mainstream fact: the Mesopotamians believed humans were created to serve the gods, not the other way around. Service, not autonomy, was the core of their worldview. For temple women, that belief played out in the most intimate parts of daily life. Quirky tidbit: some rituals required priestesses to speak in the voice of the goddess during ceremonies. That meant not only acting as her vessel, but essentially erasing your own identity in public, becoming someone else entirely. Imagine trying to hold on to yourself when your entire community sees you as a mask for divinity. Historians still argue whether temple service gave women a form of authority, since their words were treated as divine, or whether it hollowed them out. Was it empowerment to speak as a goddess, or annihilation of self? The debate lingers, but in your heart, the answer feels heavier than parchment. The spiritual toll deepens when you notice cracks in faith itself. You pray, you chant, you sacrifice, but famine still comes, plague still spreads, war still burns. You wonder if the goddess listens, or if the priests are just very good at spinning tales to keep everyone in line. These questions you dare not voice aloud. Doubt itself could be treated as impurity, another sin to cleanse. So you carry it silently, like a stone tucked deep in your chest. At night, while the city sleeps, you sometimes whisper your own name under your breath, as if reminding yourself that you exist beyond the beads, beyond the chants, beyond the temple's endless demands. It's a fragile reminder, but without it, you'd vanish completely into the goddess's shadow. Time rolls forward, and eventually, the temple stops pretending you're at the center of its rituals. You're older now, your hair streaked with gray, your skin no longer glowing in the torchlight. The priests notice. The younger women notice. Even you notice every time you catch your reflection in polished bronze. The goddess, it seems, prefers youth. At first, the changes are subtle. You're given smaller tasks, sweeping floors, preparing incense, fetching water. Duties that once marked prestige now slip to others with fresher faces. Soon, your name is mentioned less during ceremonies. The beads you wear look out of place, relics on a body no longer celebrated. Mainstream fact: temple roles in Mesopotamia varied widely, but women who aged out of sacred service often found themselves sidelined, either kept on as servants or sent back into ordinary society, stripped of the status they once held. Quirky tidbit: some temple records hint at women being reassigned to administrative work, keeping track of offerings, managing storehouses, even acting as scribes if they had the training. In theory, a quieter, less demanding life. In practice, it felt like exile within the very walls you once defined. Historians still argue whether older temple women were treated with respect as mothers of the community or quietly discarded. Some texts honor elder priestesses, others ignore them entirely. For you, the reality leans closer to invisibility. Outside the temple, ordinary women your age might have families, children grown, grandchildren on their laps. You, however, walk the courtyards alone, listening to younger women laugh the way you once did. There's no husband to lean on, no family to greet you at dawn. Only the cold comfort of routine. The greatest sting is how quickly the city forgets. The same people who once stared in awe now glance past you as if you were another shadow. Sacred one day, overlooked the next. It makes you wonder if all those rituals ever meant anything at all, or if you were simply part of the temple's endless cycle of using and replacing. And so, as twilight falls, you sit by the temple steps, feeling the cool stone against your skin. You watch torches flare to life, carried by younger hands, and realize your story isn't one of divine immortality, but of being mortal, disposable, and achingly human in a world that demanded otherwise. The greatest sting is how quickly the city forgets. The same people who once stared in awe now glance past you as if you were another shadow. Sacred one day, overlooked the next. It makes you wonder if all those rituals ever meant anything at all, or if you were simply part of the temple's endless cycle of using and replacing. And so, as twilight falls, you sit by the temple steps, feeling the cool stone against your skin. You watch torches flare to life, carried by younger hands, and realize your story isn't one of divine immortality, but of being mortal, disposable, and achingly human in a world that demanded otherwise. With age comes a strange new reality. Freedom and abandonment arrive hand in hand. When the temple no longer needs you in its central roles, you're left to navigate the city in ways you never imagined. For some women, that means being dismissed outright, returned to the family that first gave them up. But what if your family is gone or no longer wants you? Then you drift into a kind of social limbo, neither priestess nor wife, neither revered nor entirely despised. Mainstream fact: in Mesopotamian society, widows and women without strong family ties often faced precarious lives. Support networks mattered more than anything. Without them, poverty loomed. For former temple women, the sudden loss of institutional protection could be devastating. Quirky tidbit: some cuneiform texts describe older ex-temple women being granted tiny plots of land or small pensions of grain. In theory, a safety net. In practice, it was barely enough to survive, like being tossed a crust of bread after years of feasting, with the expectation that you should be grateful. Historians still argue whether these pensions were common or rare, and whether they represented genuine care or simply a way of keeping inconvenient women out of the way. Whatever the intention, for you, the reality is clear. The city no longer watches you with awe. Instead, it watches with indifference. You shuffle through the marketplace, no longer forbidden, but also no longer desired. Sellers treat you like any other aging woman. The judgmental stares have softened, but so has the attention of anyone who might have helped. You're invisible in a different way now, not feared, not scorned, just forgotten. And in that invisibility lies a different kind of burden. You've given your youth to the goddess, your body to the temple, your years to rituals that claim to ensure fertility and prosperity. Now, when your hair is white and your back bent, who ensures your survival? At night, in your small corner of the city, you light a clay lamp and whisper prayers, not the grand chants of the temple, but the quiet words of a woman asking simply to be remembered, whether by the goddess, by history, or by anyone at all. The temple may let you fade, but the city's laws never do. In Mesopotamia, justice is written on clay tablets, and those tablets do not forget. Even as you grow older, your body stiff and your voice raspy, you remain subject to the same codes that once bound you as a younger woman of the temple. Mainstream fact. The Code of Hammurabi, carved around 1750 BCE, spelled out detailed rules for nearly every corner of society: wages, inheritance, theft, contracts, even temple service. It was less about mercy and more about order, making sure everyone knew their place. For women like you, those laws could cut both ways. In theory, the temple gave you protection. You were marked as sacred property of the goddess. But step outside that boundary, say, by disobeying priests, resisting ritual, or breaking a vow, and punishment could be brutal. Think beatings, exile, or even drowning. Quirky tidbit? Some law codes included fines for slandering a temple woman, which sounds protective at first, until you realize it wasn't about safeguarding your feelings. It was about guarding the goddess's reputation. You were less a person than an extension of divine branding. Historians still argue whether these laws actually improved women's status or merely locked them tighter into roles designed by men. After all, protection in the form of fines didn't stop judgment, and sacred status didn't stop exploitation. It only wrapped your life in another layer of clay-written chains. Walking the streets as an older woman, you hear echoes of those laws in every interaction. A merchant hesitates before selling you bread, because what if dealing too casually with a temple woman invites suspicion? A passerby mutters a word you can't quite catch, but you know slander still hovers like smoke. And always, in the back of your mind, you remember, one misstep, and the same laws that once paraded you as sacred could now condemn you as sinful. The weight of clay is heavier than stone. You've lived your whole life under it. And even as your body grows fragile, the laws stay solid, baked hard in the sun, reminding you that in Mesopotamia, memory may fade, but judgment never does. Even as the laws weigh on you, superstition crowds in from every side. In Mesopotamia, the invisible world presses close. Spirits, demons, curses, and omens lurk behind every corner, and temple women are often blamed first when misfortune strikes. You know this well. One failed harvest, one sudden illness, one child's crying that won't stop, and suddenly, whispers follow you like a shadow. Mainstream fact. Mesopotamians believed that supernatural forces influenced daily life. Illness, drought, and accidents were often attributed to angry gods or malevolent spirits, and the priests' rituals aimed to appease these unseen powers. For temple women, being physically close to rituals meant proximity to the blame when things went wrong. Quirky tidbit. Some texts instruct the creation of tiny figurines representing demons, which were buried under homes or cast into rivers. Imagine living your life knowing that clay figurines might be hurled around the city to solve problems, while you are the supposed conduit of divine favor. Historians still argue whether temple women were genuinely feared as spiritual catalysts, or if these fears were exaggerated by priests to maintain control. Either way, the effect is the same: a constant need to be vigilant to avoid missteps that could be interpreted as moral failure or divine disfavor. Sometimes the paranoia spills into the temple itself. Priests may accuse a woman of negligence if a ritual falters. Maybe a bowl of beer spills or a chant is mispronounced. In public, these incidents are small. In private, they become stories whispered through corridors. Another reason to fear invisible hands pulling at your life. You can feel it most in your sleep. Shadows of figures in clay masks appear in your dreams. Sometimes you awaken believing a curse has touched you, even if rationally you know it's just fever or fatigue. And still, the fear gnaws, because for centuries, people like you were expendable scapegoats when the city faltered. As dusk falls, you kneel in the temple again, hands pressed to the cold stone, whispering not to a goddess, not to a demon, but to yourself. May this night pass. May no unseen force strike me. May my years be forgiven. It is a ritual you alone conduct, for no one else believes in the whispers you fear. By now, you've realized that survival in the temple isn't just about obedience or piety. It's about perception. How others see you determines your daily reality, and that perception is mercurial. One day, villagers bow at your presence, The next, they avoid your gaze as though your sacredness might be contagious. Every glance, every whisper, every hushed conversation carries weight. Mainstream fact: social perception in Mesopotamian cities was crucial. The reputation of temple women wasn't merely about respect, it influenced trade, diplomacy, and political alliances. Being seen correctly could literally mean the difference between food and hunger. Quirky tidbit: some temple accounts suggest women were adorned with colored powders and scented oils, specifically to enhance the perception of divine favor. It's not vanity, it's survival. Imagine having to look ethereal while your feet ache, your back is stiff, and your stomach growls. Historians still argue whether temple women were truly empowered by this visibility or if it merely reinforced dependence on male authority. Perhaps the line is razor thin. One misstep could erase years of carefully maintained credibility. You've learned to navigate this terrain like a tightrope walker. When priests, merchants, or citizens watch, you tilt your head just so, smile faintly, and maintain an aura of control. Behind closed doors, exhaustion seeps through. The eyes that once believed in your sacred presence have hardened into practical judgment or idle curiosity. There's a rhythm to it now. Read the audience, adjust posture, monitor gestures, temper expression. Every act is choreographed, whether blessing a basket of figs or stepping aside for the younger women. One slip could trigger gossip or worse, accusations that the goddess herself is displeased. At night, lying on your mat, you replay the day's performances. Did the priest notice your tiredness? Did the merchant look at you suspiciously? Was the goddess displeased because your smile faltered for a fraction of a moment? Sleep comes slowly, and when it does, it's haunted by the awareness that perception often outweighs reality in your life. Even as the city moves on, the temple continues to remind you, survival is less about faith, more about being seen in the right light at the right moment, and with just enough polish to hide the years etched into your body. Eventually, the weight of centuries, or at least decades, presses down not only on your body, but on memory. You remember the young women who arrived bright-eyed, the first days when fear and awe collided in your chest. You remember the priest's orders, the whispered gossip in the market, the nights spent clutching a reed mat, hoping to survive another ritual. And yet, most of those memories feel like someone else's story. Mainstream fact: oral tradition and memory played huge roles in Mesopotamian culture. Stories of gods, kings, and temple life were passed down through generations, but personal memories of women like you rarely survived in the clay tablets. Your life mattered in practice, yet left few traces in history. Quirky tidbit: some scribes supposedly wrote autobiographical prayers of reflection on clay tablets, chronicling illness, misfortune, or daily rituals. Imagine pouring your story into a block of mud, knowing that centuries later, someone might read your words or might not. Historians still argue whether the lives of temple women were celebrated, ignored, or deliberately erased. Their existence was both indispensable and invisible, a paradox that continues to challenge scholars. You feel that invisibility acutely. Centuries later, the world might never know your name, your struggles, your resilience. Even the temple itself begins to feel less like a home and more like a mausoleum for memories. You wander through familiar corridors, recognizing the sounds of chanting and the scents of incense, yet the faces have changed. Younger women carry on the rituals, unaware of the mistakes you made, the sacrifices you endured. And when you see them stumble or falter, a pang of both sympathy and envy strikes you. It's strange, the loneliness of being remembered only in fragments. Stories of gods persist. Your contributions, your life's minutiae, dissolve in the mists of time. And yet, each day you continue the work, perform the rituals, bless the offerings, not for fame, not for praise, but because leaving them undone feels like betraying the small thread of continuity that ties you to the past, present, and future. In this quiet endurance, you find a strange kind of dignity. It's not the recognition of the city, nor the gaze of the goddess. It's the knowledge that, in a world that often discards the expendable, you have survived, witnessed, and preserved a living memory, however fragile. By now, the city itself feels different. Streets that once hummed with gossip and barter are quieter, some neighborhoods abandoned, others rebuilt. Markets buzz with unfamiliar merchants, children you don't recognize run along alleys, and the temple seems older than memory, its stones darker, its incense smoke thicker with dust. You feel the weight of centuries pressing down, not literally, of course, but in the way time has reshaped your world and your place in it. Mainstream fact: Mesopotamian cities experienced cycles of destruction and rebuilding due to war, flooding, and political shifts. Temples were often repaired or expanded, but continuity was patchy, leaving long-term residents, like you, with a sense of dislocation. Quirky tidbit: some old records hint at temple renovations, where previous generations' offerings were stored or even repurposed. That means the gold, silver, and ornaments you once handled could be melted down for a new ritual, erasing your tangible connection to the past. Imagine touching items that once seemed eternal, only to realize they were recycled like any other commodity. Historians still argue whether temple life offered genuine social stability or just the illusion of it. From your perspective, stability is fleeting. Every ritual you perform, every bead you adjust, every whispered incantation is a fragile act of continuity in a city that forgets as quickly as it remembers. Walking the temple courtyards, you notice shadows where sunlight once pooled. The younger women hustle past, unaware of the years etched into the stones and into your own bones. Sometimes you catch a glimpse of a child staring, eyes wide with curiosity and confusion. You want to speak, to pass on the lessons of survival, but the words feel heavy, unshaped for modern ears. And yet, in these quiet moments, you discover resilience. You remember the storms, the famines, the invasions, the gossip, the diseases, the judgments, all the ways life tried to grind you down, and realize that here you still stand. Perhaps the city has changed, and the temple has changed, but somehow you endure. Endurance has become its own ritual, a slow, quiet chant of survival repeated with every breath, every step, every day. Even if no one remembers your name, even if no tablet carries your story, the act of living through it all becomes its own testimony. Eventually, even the endurance itself becomes tinged with reflection. You sit on the temple steps, watching torchlight flicker across stone walls, and realize that your life has been a series of contrasts: sacred and scorned, revered and ignored, visible and invisible. The contradictions you've carried for decades finally settle around you like a familiar cloak, and you can almost wear them without flinching. Mainstream fact: Mesopotamian temple women were historically described both as vital participants in sacred rituals and as socially ambiguous figures. Their lives straddled the lines of power, dependence, and spiritual symbolism, a tension you know intimately. Quirky tidbit: some tablets suggest former temple women occasionally returned as advisors or ritual assistants, lending their experience to ceremonies while remaining outside the spotlight. You imagine yourself in such a role, wise, observant, but no longer central, like a ghost haunting the edges of memory. Historians still argue whether this twilight role offered genuine influence or was a polite way of sidelining aging women. For you, the question isn't theoretical. It's the difference between walking through the temple corridors with dignity or being invisible among the younger, more vibrant faces. You watch younger women laugh, their voices lilting across the courtyard. You remember your own laughter at their age, laughter that mingled with fear, excitement, and awe. A pang of nostalgia strikes you, but it's tempered by relief. You've survived to see decades pass, to see generations cycle through, to witness the continuity of a tradition that demanded so much. And as night deepens, the temple grows quiet. The chants soften, the incense smoke swirls lazily, and for a moment the world holds its breath. You realize that even in a life of contradictions, even in a city that alternates between awe and judgment, you have carved a space for yourself simply by enduring. In this liminal space, between light and shadow, youth and age, sacred and forgotten, you recognize a final truth. Survival itself is a kind of ritual, and in living all these contradictions, you have performed the longest, most unbroken ceremony of all. Now, as the final torches flicker and the city outside hums with the soft, distant sounds of life, you feel the culmination of years, decades of living under the temple's gaze. You understand more than ever that your existence has been a balance of contradictions, revered yet scorned, protected yet vulnerable, sacred yet human. Every day of your life has been a negotiation between divine expectations and human limitations, and in that negotiation, you have survived. Mainstream fact: Mesopotamian temple women's lives were deeply intertwined with both spiritual and civic responsibilities. They maintained rituals, blessed offerings, and sometimes acted as intermediaries between citizens and gods. Their work was essential to the functioning of the city, even if society's perception of them was inconsistent. A quirky tidbit: some temple records describe special rituals performed for women who had served long years, celebrating their endurance and wisdom even if the ceremonies themselves were modest. It's a quiet nod to the labor and resilience that no one else publicly acknowledged, a gesture meant to honor what others often overlooked. Historians still argue whether such recognition carried real power or was purely ceremonial. Perhaps it mattered little in a practical sense. Yet for those of you who lived through decades of judgment, fatigue, and paradox, even small acknowledgement can feel profound. You look back at the path you've walked, the long corridors of incense and shadow, the crowded streets of gossip, the nights filled with fever, prayers, and relentless expectation. You've endured invasions, famine, disease, judgment, and relentless change. You've navigated the fragile politics of perception, upheld sacred rituals while your own needs went unmet, and witnessed the cycle of youth, power, and obsolescence repeat endlessly. And yet, there's a quiet triumph in the simple fact of survival. You are older, weary, and marked by the passage of time, but you are still here. Your story may not be etched in gold or recorded on grand tablets, yet it persists in your memory, in the rhythms of your movements, in the enduring legacy of the temple itself. You inhale the warm night air, letting the lingering sense of incense mingle with the faint river breeze. Your mind softens, the city hums, the temple sleeps, and in this gentle pause you recognize that the endurance, courage, and contradictions of your life are a form of quiet immortality. You've witnessed, survived, and persisted, and in doing so, you have left an indelible mark on the world, however invisible it may seem.